as autumn crept over the small town of Aldridge. The air turned crisp, and the leaves adopted hues of amber and rust. In a quaint house at the town's edge, Lila Sanderson sorted through the day's mundane mail. A bill, an advertisement, a postcard from a distant friend, until her fingers brushed against an envelope of considerable weight and peculiar texture. Pausing, she studied the old-fashioned wax seal and the intricate scrollwork pressed into the heavy cream paper. Her name, Lila Sanderson, was elegantly scripted in dark ink across the front. With a mixture of curiosity and hesitation, she broke the seal. The letter inside was written in a flowing hand that spoke of a bygone era, the kind of handwriting she had seen in her grandmother's cherished letters, stored carefully in the attic. The message was concise, but each word carried a weight of solemnity and ancient secrets. Dear Ms. Sanderson, as the last known descendant of the Hollifield line, you are hereby invited to spend a weekend at Hollifield Manor, located in the northern expanse of Blackwood Forest. This gathering aims to unveil important aspects of your heritage and discuss the responsibilities that come with your lineage. Enclosed are directions to the manor and a key, which will grant you access to the estate. We urge you to arrive no later than sunset on the 18th of October. Yours sincerely, Mr. Jonathan Thorne, caretaker of Hollifield Manor. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she set the letter down. Hollifield Manor? She had heard whispers of it from her grandmother, a place shrouded in mystery and old family tales too absurd or frightening to believe. But her grandmother had passed last winter, taking the stories with her, leaving behind only fragments of unsettling folklore that lingered like the morning mist. Compelled by the need to connect with her past and understand these cryptic tales, Lila decided she would accept the invitation. She packed her bags with essentials and some warmer clothes, knowing the northern forests were notorious for their biting cold winds and unpredictable storms. The journey to Hollifield Manor was long and solitary. As she drove, the roads narrowed, and the vibrant cityscapes gave way to desolate countryside. The trees grew denser and the path less defined. When civilization had faded away completely, replaced by the untamed wilderness of Blackwood Forest, Lila felt as if she were driving into another world, a world untouched by time. Directions from the letter guided her through winding forest paths where the trees stood so tall and thick that daylight struggled to penetrate their canopy. An uneasy silence enveloped the woods, broken only by the occasional rustle of wildlife or the creak of ancient boughs swaying in the wind. Finally, after what seemed like hours of navigating the labyrinthine forest, the trees parted to reveal Hollifield Manor. The manor was a striking sight, grandiose yet clearly worn by the passage of time. Its stone facade was covered in patches by climbing ivy, and the windows, though intact, mirrored the ghostly pallor of the sky. The estate was surrounded by a wrought iron fence with gates that appeared to have not welcomed visitors for decades. Lila parked her car and approached the gate. She retrieved the key from her pocket, the same one sent with the letter, its cool metal embossed with a Hollifield family crest, a shield bearing a closed eye and twin crescent moons. As she inserted the key into the lock, the gate creaked ominously, swinging open as if breathing a sigh, both of relief and resignation. Stepping onto the grounds of Hollifield Manor, Lila felt a chill that wasn't entirely due to the cold air. It was as if the very atmosphere was charged with a silent whisper of the past, beckoning her to unearth what had been long buried. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and walked up the gravel path leading to the front door of the manor, each step resonating with the crunch of gravel and the beating of her own heart. As she reached the grand oak door, she turned back to look at the path she had travelled. The forest seemed to close in behind her, shrouding the way she had come in shadows, as though the woods themselves were conspiring to keep her there. Turning the handle, Lila entered Hollifield Manor, stepping into the dimly lit foyer that smelled of lavender and dust, a stark reminder that while she was expected, The manor hadn't seen life for years. But unbeknownst to her, life, in myriad mysterious forms, had indeed persisted in the shadows of Hollifield Manor. And now, those shadows waited eagerly for Lila. The heavy oak door closed behind Lila with a resonant thud that echoed through the expansive foyer of Hollifield Manor. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the dim interior, illuminated only by the fading light filtering through stained-glass windows, casting colourful patterns on the dusty floor. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and a faint hint of something floral, perhaps roses, long since wilted but still clinging to the air like a memory. As Lila stepped further into the foyer, her gaze was drawn upwards to a grand staircase that spiralled into the shadows of the upper floors. The walls were adorned with portraits of stern-looking individuals, their eyes seeming to follow her movements with silent scrutiny. At the base of the stairs stood a large bronze statue of a knight, its sword pointing downwards, as if marking the line between the known and realms beyond. Just as she was about to call out, wondering if indeed anyone else had received a similar invitation, footsteps echoed from the corridor to her left. From the shadows emerged a man of considerable age, his back slightly hunched, leaning heavily on a carved wooden cane. His hair was as white as the cobwebs clinging to the corners of the high ceilings, and his eyes, a piercing blue, reflected a sharpness that contrasted with his frail frame. "Miss Sanderson, I presume?" His voice was stronger than she expected, with a resonance that filled the space. "Yes, I'm Lila Sanderson." "You must be Mr. Thorne," Lila replied, extending a hand, which he took with a surprisingly firm grip. "Indeed, I am Jonathan Thorne, the caretaker of this estate. Welcome to Hollifield Manor. The others have already arrived. They're in the drawing-room." He gestured towards another ornately carved wooden door at the end of the hallway. "May I take your coat?" As Mr. Thorne relieved her of her coat, Lila followed him down the hallway, her footsteps muffled by the thick, ornate rugs that lined the floor. The walls here were lined with more portraits and tapestries that depicted scenes of hunting and other pastoral pleasures, hinting at the manor's once vibrant life. Upon entering the drawing-room, Lila was greeted by the sight of 4 other individuals, each seated awkwardly on antique furniture that looked as though it hadn't been used in decades. The room itself was a large, stately chamber with a high ceiling supported by dark wooden beams. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, within which a fire crackled and popped, casting a warm glow that fought back the encroaching chill of the manor. "Everyone, this is Miss Lila Sanderson. Lila, allow me to introduce you to the others," Mr. Thorne announced. First, he introduced Edgar Wainwright, a tall, thin man with nervous eyes and a quick, forced smile. He was a historian by trade, intrigued by the myths surrounding the Hollifield lineage. Next was Eleanor Vance, a middle-aged woman with sharp features and an even sharper tongue, dressed as though she stepped out from a different era, her clothes rich and velvety. Beside her sat the twins, Oliver and Olivia Green, young and vibrant, with an air of carefree curiosity that seemed out of place in such a sombre gathering. They were distant cousins, as they shared, excited by the adventure and the lore of their shared ancestry. Mr. Thorne then excused himself, mentioning preparations for dinner. As his footsteps receded, an awkward silence fell over the group, each person seemingly caught in their thoughts about why they had been brought together. Lila decided to break the ice. "So, how much do we all know about this place? About the Hollifield legacy?" Eleanor was the first to respond. "Only what the tales told by firelight dared to reveal. Our family was once prominent, influential, but plagued by misfortunes that led to our downfall. This manor is said to be the heart of it all." Edgar nodded in agreement. "Yes, and there are rumours of a curse, one that led to the untimely demise of many Hollifields. It's said that the curse must be lifted by a direct descendant on the night of a blood moon, which, coincidentally, is tonight." The twins exchanged excited glances. Olivia chimed in, We heard about secret passages and hidden treasures too. Imagine if we found something that could prove all those stories." As they discussed, Lila felt a growing sense of unease, her skin prickling with the heat from the fire and the weight of countless eyes from portraits lining the walls. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone in their speculations, that the manor itself listened, and perhaps waited. Dinner was announced not long after, and the group moved to the dining hall, a vast room with a long table set for what could have been a royal banquet in another age. As they took their seats, the candles flickered strangely, as if stirred by a breath of wind, or a sigh from the past. The meal passed with further discussions of their family's dark history, each tale more foreboding than the last. As the clock chimed the hour, the wind outside picked up, howling through the eaves, as if heralding the rise of something long buried within the walls of Hollifield Manor. After the dinner, the guests retired to their respective rooms for the evening, each with the burden of the Hollifield family stories weighing heavily upon them. Lila, however, found herself restless, unable to succumb to the comfort of sleep in the vast, cold room assigned to her. Instead, she wrapped herself in a heavy shawl and paced the length of her quarters, her mind racing with thoughts of curses and secrets whispered over candlelit conversations. The room was adorned with antique furniture that creaked with age, and the walls were lined with silk wallpaper that had faded over the decades into a melancholy shade of gold. A large, ornate mirror stood opposite the bed, its surface speckled with age, reflecting the dim light of the fire in a ghostly glow. As the fire in her room flickered, casting eerie shadows across the floor, Lila's attention was drawn to a faint sound, barely audible over the crackling of the flames. It was a whisper, so soft it was almost indistinguishable from the wind that played against the manor's ancient walls. She stilled, straining her ears, and the whisper came again, a sighing breath that seemed to speak her name, Lila. Intrigued and unnerved, Lila followed the sound out of her room and into the chilly corridor. The halls of Hollifield Manor were dark, lit only by the occasional flickering candle mounted on the wall. The air was cooler here, and as she moved towards the source of the whispers, it grew perceptibly colder. The whispers seemed to be emanating from behind a wall at the end of the corridor. The surface was smooth and unbroken save for a faint outline almost imperceptible unless one was looking for it. Upon closer inspection, Lila discovered a small seam, a hidden door camouflaged within the elaborate designs of the wallpaper. Her fingers traced the outline, pressing gently against the wood, and to her surprise, the panel pushed inward, revealing a narrow, dark passage. With a mixture of trepidation and resolve, Lila stepped into the passage, the air dense with the must of undisturbed years. She pulled out her phone, using it as a makeshift torch, the beam of light slicing through the darkness. The passage was cramped and cobwebbed, winding deeper into the bowels of the manor. As she progressed, the whispers grew louder, now joined by other voices, a chorus of soft, pleading tones that murmured unintelligible secrets. The narrow passageway eventually opened into a small, hidden room. The air inside was thick with dust, and numerous documents and books lay scattered across a heavy wooden desk in the center. Lila approached the desk, her light revealing layers of dust disturbed only by the occasional footprint, a sign that someone had been here before her. Among the scattered papers, she found old photographs of the Hollifield family, their faces marked by the same stern expressions she'd seen in the portraits downstairs. There were letters, too, written in the same flowing script as her invitation, discussing mundane estate affairs but interspersed with frantic notes about protecting some precious legacy. As Lila sifted through the papers, the whispers intensified, now clearly discernible as voices calling out to her, beckoning her to listen. She picked up a brittle letter, the handwriting shaky with urgency, detailing a ritual meant to cleanse the manor of its lurking darkness. It spoke of a gathering, much like the one she was currently attending, and a sacrifice that was required to end the family curse once and for all. Suddenly, a cold gust of air swept through the room, extinguishing her light and plunging her into darkness. The voices crescendoed into a loud, mournful wail, then stopped abruptly as the door through which she had entered swung shut with a resounding slam. Heart racing, Lila fumbled in the dark, her hands finally finding her phone. She switched it back on, the light revealing that the room was exactly as she had found it, save for the palpable shift in the air, a chilling silence that had fallen like a shroud. Feeling a deep, unsettling fear, Lila quickly made her way back through the passageway, the hidden door shutting behind her with a click that sounded ominously final. Back in her room, the whispers were gone, but the silence left in their wake was oppressive, filled with the echoes of secrets she had just uncovered. Shaken, Lila crawled into bed, wrapping herself tightly in the covers as if they could shield her from the night's revelations. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful, filled with dreams of shadowy figures and voices crying out from the walls, calling her name, binding her to the manor's cursed legacy. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through her window, Lila knew that the coming day would bring more than just answers. It would demand a choice, a decision that could alter the course of her destiny and that of Hollowfield Manor forever. The morning light spilled through the stained glass, casting colorful reflections across the stone floor of Lila's room, but did little to lift the heavy atmosphere left by the night's unsettling discoveries. After a brief, restless sleep, she rose, determined to explore more of the manor in the light of day, driven by the haunting chorus of whispers that echoed in her dreams. Lila dressed quickly and stepped out into the hallway, the air still cool from the night. The manor seemed different in the daylight, less foreboding, but every shadow seemed to hint at hidden depths, every creak a whisper of its ancient past. Her first stop was the Grand Library, where she hoped to find more information about the ritual mentioned in the hidden room. The library of Hollowfield Manor was a vast room lined with shelves that reached the ceiling, filled with leather-bound books that smelled of must and mold. Lila scanned the titles, but they seemed unrelated to her needs. Old tomes on botany, history, and poetry. She continued to search until she found a narrow door hidden behind a tapestry depicting the Hollowfield crest. Pulling it aside revealed a smaller private study, much dustier and undisturbed, with books that looked far older and more relevant to her quest. As she perused the shelves, a large, leather-bound book caught her eye. Its cover was embossed with symbols that matched those described in the letter, crescent moons and closed eyes. She pulled it down carefully, the cover groaning under its own weight. The book was a collection of family lore and detailed accounts of the Hollowfield curse, including various attempts to break it. It mentioned a specific location within the manor critical to the rituals, the portrait gallery. Armed with this new information, Lila left the library to find the portrait gallery. According to the book, it was located in a secluded wing of the manor that had been closed off for years. As she walked through the corridors, the manor seemed to watch her, the eyes in the portraits tracking her every move. Eventually, she came across a large double door, slightly ajar, with heavy dust and cobwebs suggesting it hadn't been opened in years. Pushing the doors open, Lila stepped into the portrait gallery. It was a long, narrow room with walls covered in portraits of the Hollowfield ancestors. Each face seemed to tell its own story of grief and madness, a visual history of the curse's toll on her family. The windows were draped in heavy curtains, casting most of the room in shadow. Only the far end of the gallery was bathed in light, highlighting a particularly large portrait. As Lila approached, she realized it was a painting of Eleanor Hollowfield, the matriarch said to have first invoked the curse. In the portrait, Eleanor's eyes seemed almost alive, filled with a deep, palpable sorrow. Below the portrait, a small plaque read, Eleanor Hollowfield, bound by shadow and sorrow, 1685. Remembering the whispers from the hidden room, Lila felt a sudden chill. She reached out a hand tentatively to touch the frame of the portrait and felt a jolt, as if the painted eyes had flickered. Pulling her hand back, she noticed a small latch hidden in the frame. Curiosity overcoming her hesitation, she pressed it, and a soft click echoed in the room as part of the wall beside the portrait swung open to reveal another hidden passage. This new passage was different from the one she discovered the night before. It was lined with velvet, and the air smelled of lavender and candle wax. The passage led to a small, circular room that seemed to serve as a private viewing room for the portrait. In the center of the room was a pedestal with an open book and a quill, as if someone had been in the middle of writing. Lila approached the book. It was a diary, Eleanor Hollofield's, by the looks of it. The entries were erratic, filled with frantic scribbles about visions, ghosts, and dark rituals. The last entry was the most disturbing, detailing a final ritual meant to bind the curse to protect her descendants, sacrificing her soul in the process. As Lila read, the room grew colder, the shadows deeper. She could feel Eleanor's despair, her immense burden permeating the very walls of the room. The diary mentioned a crypt beneath the manor where Eleanor's remains were interred, suggesting that her spirit was restless, bound to the manor as much as the curse itself. Putting the diary down, Lila realized the weight of what she might have to face. The answer to breaking the curse seemed increasingly tied to confronting the spirit of Eleanor herself, to undoing the dark pact made centuries ago. As she left the room, the portrait of Eleanor seemed to watch her go, the painted eyes sorrowful but perhaps also hopeful. Returning to the main part of the manor, Lila felt a resolve hardening within her. She knew what she had to do next. She needed to find the crypt, to confront the heart of the curse. It was no longer just about her curiosity or heritage. It was about ending the legacy of sorrow that haunted her family. As the shadows of evening began to deepen into the velvety thickness of night, the atmosphere within Hollofield Manor seemed to pulse with a charged anticipation. Outside, the wind began to howl, its mournful cries echoing the haunting whispers that seemed embedded within the very walls of the manor. Lila felt each gust as though it was speaking directly to her, urging her towards a destiny she was still grappling to understand. After her chilling discovery in the portrait gallery and the unnerving experience of reading Eleanor Hollofield's diary, Lila knew that her next steps ventured beyond the boundaries of the rational world she understood. The diary's last entry had provided a cryptic clue to the location of the crypt where Eleanor was supposedly interred. According to the faded, tear-stained pages, the entrance was hidden in the manor's neglected chapel, a place not marked on any of the modern floor plans Lila had seen. Gathering her resolve and a sturdy flashlight, Lila left her room as the clock tower struck midnight. The sound boomed through the corridors, each strike resonating like a heartbeat, pulsing through the air. The corridors were shrouded in darkness, the usual flickering candles snuffed out by the draught, leaving only the lightning outside to guide her way intermittently. Her path took her down a narrow, rarely used stairway at the end of the east wing, the steps covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. The air grew colder as she descended, the musty smell of decay becoming overwhelming. The stairway ended at a heavy wooden door, swollen from moisture, that barely budged when she pushed. With a determined shove, the door groaned open, revealing the long-forgotten chapel. The chapel was a small, somber room with stained glass windows that were now dark and opaque, offering no insight into the world outside. Pews lined the room, their wood rotted and upholstery moth-eaten. At the far end, an altar stood under a large, faded mural of the Hollofield crest. As Lila approached, her flashlight beam caught on something unusual about the altar. It seemed newer than anything else in the room, and there were fresh scratches in the wood, as though it had been recently moved. Remembering the details in Eleanor's diary, Lila inspected the altar more closely. She discovered that it was indeed movable. With effort, she slid it aside to reveal a trapdoor with a rusted iron ring. Pulling open the trapdoor released a gust of cold, stale air that smelled of earth and decay. A ladder led down into the darkness. With a deep breath to steady her nerves, Lila descended into the crypt. The ladder creaked ominously under her weight, threatening to collapse but holding firm. At the bottom, she found herself in a narrow tunnel lined with niches that held the remains of what she assumed were long-dead Hollofields, their bones barely visible in the dim light of her flashlight. The tunnel ended at a stone sarcophagus, elaborate in design, with the Hollifield crest carved into the lid. This, she knew, was Eleanor's final resting place. The air around the sarcophagus was palpably colder, and Lila could feel the hair on the back of her neck stand on end as she approached. She placed her hand on the sarcophagus, half expecting Eleanor to reach out from beyond the grave. Instead, a wave of sorrow so profound washed over her, it brought tears to her eyes. It was a sorrow of centuries of grief and guilt, of a spirit bound to a dark fate. Gathering her courage, Lila spoke softly into the darkness. "Eleanor Hollifield, I am your descendant. I have come to free you and our family from this curse." Her voice echoed off the stone walls, carrying with it a plea for release. For a long moment there was silence. Then a whisper, so faint Lila thought she might have imagined it, filled the space. "Freedom comes at a cost. What must I do?" Lila asked, her voice trembling with the cold and the rising fear that she might not be prepared for the answer. "You must complete the ritual," the whisper returned, now a discernible voice, sorrowful yet clear. "But be warned, the shadows are not easily banished. They will demand a sacrifice." Lila nodded, understanding that whatever the sacrifice, the weight of her family's suffering was too great to bear any longer. "I will do what must be done," she affirmed into the darkness, the echo of her resolve firm in the chilling air of the crypt. As she ascended the ladder back to the chapel, the storm outside seemed to reach a frenetic crescendo, as if the very elements were aligning themselves with her grim determination. Tonight, under the cover of darkness and storm, Lila would face the legacy of Hollifield Manor head-on, ready to confront whatever shadows awaited her in the final hours of the night. After emerging from the crypt beneath the chapel, Lila felt the weight of her task like a mantle on her shoulders. The storm outside raged, mirroring the turmoil inside her. Wind battered the manor's old windows, and rain lashed against the stone walls, sounding like whispers of the past converging upon the present. Lila made her way back to the main part of the manor, her mind racing with the ghostly promise of a necessary sacrifice. She knew she couldn't delay. The blood moon was at its zenith, a rare celestial event that Eleanor's diary had marked as essential for the ritual's power. Time was of the essence, and the heart of the manor awaited her. Returning to the library, Lila gathered the ancient tomes that detailed the ritual. The books spoke of a hidden chamber within the manor where all attempts to lift the curse had been conducted but had never been completed, either through disruption or the faltering will of those involved. This chamber, hidden behind the library itself, was designed specifically for this purpose, its walls etched with runes and sigils that pulsed faintly in the light of her torch. The entrance to the chamber was concealed by a bookcase that moved aside when Lila pressed a hidden lever, discovered by a loose tile on the floor that she had accidentally stepped on. The chamber revealed itself, a circular room with a domed ceiling painted with a mural of the night sky as it would appear during the blood moon. The floor was a mosaic, depicting the Hollifield crest surrounded by various symbols of alchemy and mysticism. In the center of the room, a stone altar stood, stark and foreboding. On the altar lay an assortment of objects, a silver dagger, a chalice, and a set of ancient scrolls. Lila approached, her steps echoing in the chamber. She unrolled the scrolls. They were made of a material she couldn't identify, and the text was written in a flowing script that shimmered under her flashlight. The ritual required the blood of a Hollifield, willingly given, to be mixed with the ashes of Eleanor Hollifield, which she had collected from the sarcophagus. According to the texts, this mixture would create a conduit for the spirits bound by the curse to communicate and possibly find peace. The blood represented life and continuity. The ashes symbolized death and the past. As Lila prepared the items, she repeated the incantation written in the scroll. The words felt powerful and ominous as they left her mouth, hanging in the air with a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the manor. The chamber responded. The runes on the walls began to glow softly, casting a pale light that grew steadily. The air thickened, and a chill descended upon the room, a cold that seeped into her bones. Then the whispers started, soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, then growing louder, into discernible voices. They were cries of pain and sorrow, a cacophony of despair that filled the chamber with haunting sounds. Lila stood firm, her voice steady as she continued the incantation. She took the silver dagger and, with a resolute breath, sliced the palm of her hand, letting the blood drip into the chalice. She then added the ashes, the mixture hissing as the components combined. A wind seemed to rise within the chamber, swirling around her, whipping her hair and robes into a frenzy. She poured the mixture over the altar, and the voices crescendoed into a loud wail. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, they stopped. Silence enveloped the chamber. The glowing ceased, and darkness reclaimed the space. Lila felt a profound sadness wash over her, but also a sense of release. She waited, her breath shallow, her injured hand still outstretched over the altar. Then a soft light appeared above the altar, growing brighter. It formed into the shape of a woman, Eleanor Hollifield. The apparition looked at Lila, her eyes conveying a depth of gratitude and sorrow. She nodded, her lips moving in a silent thank you before she faded away, the light dissipating with her. The chamber felt different now, lighter, as if a heavy shroud had been lifted from it. Lila leaned against the altar, exhausted but relieved. The curse was broken, the spirits were free, and though the manor would always be a place steeped in history and pain, it no longer held the shadows at its heart. As she left the chamber, closing the bookcase behind her, Lila felt the manor settle, an almost imperceptible shift, as if it too were breathing a sigh of relief. She knew that the dawn, soon to break, would herald not just a new day but a new beginning for Hollifield Manor. The storm outside Hollifield Manor raged through the night, but inside, a profound calm had settled over Lila. After performing the ritual in the hidden chamber and encountering the spirit of Eleanor Hollifield, Lila felt the weight of centuries lift slightly from her shoulders. But the echoes of Eleanor's words, "freedom comes at a cost," still haunted her. The ritual may have been completed, but there was a lingering sense of unfinished business. Something felt unresolved, as if the manor itself was holding its breath. After leaving the chamber, Lila made her way back through the winding corridors of the manor. Her footsteps echoed through the vast, darkened halls, mingling with the sound of rain pounding against the old windows. Hollifield Manor felt different now, lighter perhaps, but still ancient and full of secrets. The storm's fury outside seemed to emphasize the contrast between the chaos of the outside world and the fragile stillness within these walls. Exhaustion tugged at her, but Lila couldn't rest yet. She had released the spirits, had ended the curse that had plagued her family for generations, but at what cost? The whispers from the crypt, the plea in Eleanor's eyes, there was something more, something deeper she had yet to understand. The cryptic promise of freedom echoed in her mind, and Lila knew she wouldn't be able to leave this place until she fully understood what that meant. As she climbed the grand staircase to her room, the old wood creaked under her feet, and the flickering candlelight cast shadows that seemed to dance along the walls, playing tricks on her tired mind. But it wasn't her mind playing tricks. There was a presence here. Lila felt it, faint but unmistakable. The air grew cold as she reached the landing at the top of the stairs, and a familiar voice whispered her name. Lila! She stopped in her tracks, heart pounding, eyes darting around the dimly lit hall. The voice was soft, almost tender, but unmistakably real. It was the same voice that had whispered to her from the walls on the first night, the same voice that had guided her to the crypt and the portrait gallery. Lila! Come. The voice came from the direction of the west wing, the part of the manor that had been sealed off for years, and which none of the other guests had ventured into. She hadn't dared explore it herself. Until now. With growing apprehension, Lila followed the voice. The doors to the west wing were heavy and stiff, their hinges groaning as she pushed them open. The air beyond the threshold was colder still, almost frigid, as if this part of the manor had been frozen in time. Dust thickly blanketed the floor, and the few remaining pieces of furniture looked as if they had not been touched in decades. The smell of mildew and decay was pervasive, but there was something else in the air too, something almost floral. A faint scent of lavender lingered, as though someone had been here not so long ago. The voice beckoned her further into the heart of the west wing, leading her down a narrow, winding corridor she hadn't noticed before. As she walked, the scent of lavender grew stronger, mixing with the musty smell of the ancient manor. The whispers continued, soft and inviting, urging her forward. Eventually, the corridor opened into a large, forgotten room, its ceiling vaulted and lined with dark wooden beams. The room was eerily similar to the portrait gallery, but far grander. Along the walls were portraits, much larger than the ones she had seen before, and far more detailed. These were not the austere images of her Hollifield ancestors. These portraits seemed almost lifelike, the subjects captured in moments of deep emotion, anguish, despair, and longing. In the dim light, the figures in the portraits appeared to move, their eyes filled with pleading, their hands outstretched toward her. At the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its frame encrusted with jewels and delicate engravings. The glass was dark, almost black, and reflected nothing of the room around it. Instead, it seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light, as though it was a window into another place entirely. Lila felt a strange pull toward it, a magnetic force that seemed to beckon her closer. As she approached, the whispers grew louder, now distinct voices calling out to her. She could hear Eleanor's voice among them, soft but urgent. "Lila, you must finish what was started." Lila stood before the mirror, her reflection barely visible in the dark, shifting surface. The voices swirled around her, rising in intensity until they were almost deafening. Her heart raced, and her breath came in short, shallow bursts as the pull of the mirror intensified. Suddenly, the dark surface of the mirror rippled like water, and a figure began to emerge from within. Lila stepped back in shock as the figure solidified, stepping out of the mirror and into the room. It was Eleanor Hollifield, but she was not the same as she had been in the crypt. Here she was younger, more vibrant, her eyes sharp and filled with purpose. "You have done well, Lila," Eleanor said, her voice strong and clear. "You have freed the souls bound to this place, but there is one last step. One last soul that must be released." Lila's throat tightened. She knew what Eleanor was about to say, even before the words left her lips. "You," Eleanor said, her eyes locking onto Lila's. "You must stay." The words hit Lila like a physical blow. She stumbled back, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, I can't. I've broken the curse. I've freed you. I can't stay here." Eleanor's expression softened, but there was no mistaking the sadness in her eyes. "The curse has been lifted, but the manor requires a caretaker, someone to watch over it, to ensure that the darkness does not return. You are the last of the Hollifield line, Lila. It is your duty, your fate." Lila's mind raced. She had come to the manor seeking answers, seeking to free her family from the curse that had haunted them for generations. But she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to become a part of the manor's dark history herself. I don't want this," Lila whispered, her voice trembling. Eleanor stepped closer, her hand reaching out to gently touch Lila's arm. "None of us wanted this. But it is the price we pay for the choices of those who came before us. You have the strength to bear this burden, Lila. You were chosen for a reason." Lila felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had thought that breaking the curse would set her free, but instead it had bound her even more tightly to the manor and its secrets. The voices around her had quieted now, as if waiting for her decision, watching to see what she would do. Eleanor stepped back, her form flickering slightly, as though she were fading back into the mirror. "If you stay, the manor will be at peace. The spirits will no longer be restless. But if you leave, the darkness will return, and the curse will begin again." Lila swallowed hard, her mind spinning with the weight of the choice before her. She could feel the pull of the manor, the centuries of history and sorrow pressing down on her, urging her to stay. But she could also feel the desire for freedom, the longing to leave this place behind and live her own life, free from the shadow of her family's past. For what felt like an eternity, Lila stood in silence, her heart torn between two worlds. Finally, she took a deep breath and met Eleanor's gaze. "I understand now," she said quietly. "I understand what must be done." Eleanor nodded, her expression unreadable. "Then it is done." With that, the mirror began to shimmer again, its dark surface rippling as Eleanor stepped back into it. The voices faded, and the room grew still. Lila stood alone in the portrait gallery, the silence of the manor enveloping her like a shroud. She felt the weight of the decision settle over her, but with it came a strange sense of peace. She had made her choice. She would remain at Hollifield Manor, bound to its walls, its history, and its ghosts. But the curse, at last, was broken. In the days that followed, the storm subsided, and the manor grew quiet. The other guests, unaware of the events that had transpired, left one by one, their memories of the weekend at Hollifield fading like a distant dream. But Lila remained. She walked the halls of the manor, her footsteps echoing through the empty rooms, her presence a part of the very fabric of the place. The portraits watched over her, silent and still, their eyes no longer filled with sorrow. The whispers in the walls had quieted, and the shadows that once lurked in every corner had retreated. Hollifield Manor was at peace, and so was Lila, though her fate had been sealed within its walls. The last of the Hollifield line, the caretaker of the manor, and the keeper of its secrets. And so, the manor stood, timeless and unchanging, a monument to the past, its future now in Lila's hands. Years passed, and Hollifield Manor became more than just an imposing, forgotten relic of the past. It was a living entity, breathing with memories, whispers, and the pulse of a history too deep and too twisted to be easily forgotten. But with each passing season, the air within its walls changed. The sharp edges of despair dulled, and the oppressive atmosphere of sorrow gradually lifted. The manor still held its mysteries, but they were no longer malevolent. Instead, they seemed more like secrets long buried, waiting patiently for time to erode them entirely. Lila became a part of the manor's landscape, her presence as much a fixture of Hollifield as the portraits on the walls, the creaking of old floorboards, and the wind that hummed through the eaves. Her hair turned silver, her face grew lined with time, but her bond to the place deepened. She became its caretaker not just in title, but in spirit. The few locals who dared wander close to the manor would occasionally catch glimpses of her in the distance, standing by a window, walking along the grounds, or tending to the overgrown garden at the edge of the forest. Rumours spread through the nearby village of Aldridge, whispering of the strange woman who had inherited Hollifield and never left. Some said she was mad, driven to isolation by the weight of the curse. Others, particularly the older villagers who remembered the tales of the Hollifields, believed she had made peace with the spirits, and that the manor had finally found its keeper. Lila rarely ventured into town, though when she did, her presence drew the curious and the cautious alike. People could sense something different about her, a quiet strength and an agelessness that seemed to transcend time. There was something otherworldly about her, a serenity that made people both wary and reverent. She was no longer just Lila Sanderson. To the villagers, she was the embodiment of Hollifield Manor, the last thread in a legacy that had spanned centuries. But inside the manor, Lila lived in harmony with the house and its history. The portraits, once so haunting, now felt like family watching over her. The grand halls, once filled with cold whispers, were quiet and still, save for the sound of her footsteps and the occasional creak of settling wood. The spirits of the Hollifield line, no longer trapped or restless, had faded into peace, their memories preserved only in the artifacts and books Lila meticulously kept. One day, a knock echoed through the vast, empty house, a sound that was almost foreign to Lila after so many years of isolation. She opened the door to find a young woman standing nervously on the threshold, clutching a worn leather notebook. Her eyes were wide, filled with awe and apprehension at the sight of the manor looming behind Lila. "Are you Lila Sanderson?" the woman asked, her voice trembling slightly, as though she feared the answer. Lila nodded, her silver hair falling softly around her shoulders. "I am." The young woman hesitated before speaking again. "I'm Clara Hollifield. I'm a distant relative. I've been researching my family's history, and I found letters mentioning Hollifield Manor. I had to come see it for myself." The name sparked a sense of recognition in Lila, though distant. Clara must have been from a branch of the family that had left long before the curse had tightened its grip on the estate. She could see the mixture of hope and fear in Clara's eyes, the same emotions Lila had felt when she first received the invitation so many years ago. "I wasn't sure anyone still lived here," Clara continued, looking up at the grand facade of the house. "The stories I found, they weren't kind. They talked about a curse, about disappearances, and madness." Lila smiled gently, the faintest trace of sadness touching her lips. "The stories are true, in their way. But the curse has been lifted." Clara looked surprised. "Lifted? How?" Lila's eyes drifted toward the horizon, where the distant line of the forest met the cloudy sky. The weight of her years here, the burden of her decision, and the peace that followed, all settled in her chest. It was a legacy she had borne, one she had never spoken of to anyone else, until now. "It was a dark history," Lila began softly, "but it has ended. The manor was cursed by the choices of our ancestors, trapped in their sorrow and mistakes. But that burden has been lifted. The spirits that once haunted this place have found their peace. The house is at rest now." Clara seemed to relax a little, though her curiosity was clearly piqued. "So, the stories of Hollifield, the curse, it's over?" Lila nodded. "Yes, but the legacy remains. It's in the walls, in the air. This place holds the memories of the past, both good and bad. It's up to us to remember them, but not to be bound by them." Clara looked around, her gaze lingering on the towering stone structure, its ivy-covered walls, and the long-forgotten grandeur that still clung to the manor. "And you've been here all this time? Alone?" Lila smiled again, this time more warmly. "Not alone. I've had the company of the manor, and the memories of those who came before. I was chosen to stay, to watch over it, and to ensure that it remains a place of peace. Hollifield has a legacy, but it no longer needs to be one of fear." Clara seemed to understand, her expression softening. She had come seeking answers about her family's past, about the darkness that had once claimed Hollifield Manor, and while she had found the truth, she had also found something more, a sense of closure, and perhaps even a way forward. "I'd like to learn more," Clara said after a long pause, "about our family, about the history here. Would you tell me?" Lila looked into Clara's eyes, seeing a reflection of her own younger self. There was a desire for understanding, a hunger to know the truth, but also a hope that the darkness could be left behind. "Of course," Lila replied. "There's much to tell. Come inside." She stepped aside, and Clara entered the grand foyer, her eyes widening at the sheer magnitude of the place. As the door closed behind them, the manor seemed to welcome the newcomer. The house had been waiting for this moment, for the next generation to learn its story, and for the next chapter in its long and storied history to begin. Together, Lila and Clara walked through the halls, the portraits looking down at them as they passed, their eyes no longer haunted but watchful, as though content that their legacy was finally in capable hands. The future of Holyfield Manor was no longer one of fear or despair. Its legacy had shifted, no longer a tale of darkness, but one of redemption, healing, and remembrance. And as long as someone remained to remember the stories, the manor would endure, timeless, peaceful, and at last, free from the chains of its cursed past.